Thomas was being dragged by a rope by Vlad, who rode on top of his horse. Thomas desperately screamed for someone to save him. His father, the village head, had come outside to witness the scene and was completely shocked. He shouted for someone to stop the madness and urged them to hurry. However, the villagers, who were far from being trained soldiers, could only mutter among themselves, wondering how they were supposed to stop a charging horse. They held spears in their hands while the furious village head yelled at them, demanding to know what they were doing. He called them useless bastards and ordered them to at least point their spears forward. Vlad and his horse continued charging at full speed directly toward them. Although the peasants were filled with doubt, they raised their spears toward Vlad. Vlad's horse stared at them with glowing eyes full of fury. The peasants were startled, but then the horse released a terrifying growl. To the frightened villagers, the beast looked like an enraged giant. Panic took over, and they scattered while covering their faces to protect themselves. Vlad suddenly pulled his horse to a stop right in front of them. The peasants were left exhausted, frightened, and sprawled across the ground. After stopping, Vlad demanded to know who the village head was and ordered him to step forward immediately. The village head hesitated and remained where he was, simply staring at Vlad. Vlad mocked them and questioned why they had sent such pathetic trash, referring to Thomas, whose eye was swollen and bloodshot and who had lost several teeth from the severe beating Vlad had given him. Vlad then shouted again, demanding to know which village head had dared to ignore a knight's honor. The village head stammered in disbelief and wondered where this supposed knight had come from. Hearing this, Stefan stepped forward and warned the village head that if he were in his position, he would immediately fall to his knees. The village head angrily asked what Stefan was talking about. He argued that even if Vlad possessed some skill, he was still only one man while they had dozens of people. He claimed that if Stefan and his group took the lead, they could easily overpower him. Stefan let out a heavy sigh and asked whether the village head still could not understand the situation. To him, Vlad looked like a predator smiling at a flock of helpless sheep. Vlad's expression became even more menacing. Realizing how hopeless the situation was, Stefan raised his hands and announced that his group was leaving. One of the peasants immediately protested and demanded to know what was wrong with them. He insisted that they should do the job they had been paid for and reminded them that they had been hired for exactly this kind of situation. Stefan turned toward him with a cold expression and asked whether he was the one who had paid them. The peasants stammered in confusion. Stefan explained that their request had come from Baron Rosmitz, the true lord of the village. Staring at him threateningly, Stefan demanded to know why someone spoiled by peace, who understood nothing about how the world worked, was talking so much. He made it clear that they would tolerate no more nonsense. The peasants were left speechless. One of Stefan's subordinates stepped forward and ordered them to drop their weapons immediately, calling them idiots. He revealed that Vlad was a genuine knight and stated that if Vlad wished, he could cut off all their heads using nothing more than a wooden sword. The village head was stunned and tried to respond, but Stefan ignored him completely and walked directly toward Vlad. He bowed deeply with great respect and greeted Sir Vlad, saying that it was good to meet him again. The other mercenaries followed his example and showed the same respect. Vlad acknowledged him and remarked that it had been a long time since he had last seen Captain Stefan. The peasants watched the scene in horror and whispered among themselves. They realized the mercenaries were treating Vlad with great respect and wondered how they could possibly know each other. Fear gripped them as they imagined what might happen next. The village head was completely shell-shocked as he finally realized that Vlad was truly a knight. Cold sweat covered his body because he knew that knights possessed the authority to execute people for disrespect without facing legal punishment. Vlad looked directly at him and remarked that he was very lucky. Wearing a chilling and threatening expression, Vlad added that because he was currently on vacation, he was feeling generous. Hearing those words, the village head immediately collapsed to the ground and fell to his knees. Some time later, inside the village head's house, the man remained on his knees and begged for mercy. He sincerely apologized and cried that they had committed the ultimate disrespect by failing to recognize a true knight. Vlad interrupted him with a cold demand for 3 gold coins per person. The village head did not understand what he meant, so Vlad explained that he would forgive the men who had pointed spears at him in the square. However, he could not overlook those who had dared to force their way into his squire's home. Still kneeling, the village head pleaded that 3 gold coins was an impossible amount for such a small village. Vlad immediately cut him off and added that his son would cost 10 gold coins. The village head froze in terror. Vlad asked why he seemed so shocked and pointed out that the penalty for insulting a knight was only 10 gold coins. He added that Baron Rosmitz, the lord of the village, would also consider such compensation entirely reasonable. One of the mercenaries laughed and mocked the village head, saying that it was true and that he should be grateful his head was still attached to his neck. The desperate village head tried to protest again, but Vlad refused to let him finish. Vlad stated that there was another option besides paying money. The village head desperately begged to know what it was. Vlad stared directly into his eyes and, with a deadly serious expression, ordered him to cut off the left arm of every man involved. As for his son, both arms would have to be removed. His eye gleamed dangerously as he declared that he had personally offered 2 methods and that there would be no further negotiation. The village head was terrified beyond words. Realizing that the night was completely serious, Vlad asked whether he had anything else to say. Broken and defeated, the village head bowed deeply and quietly replied that he did not. Vlad then announced that he wished to speak privately with the captain and ordered everyone else to leave the room. Everyone obeyed and left, while the mercenaries helped the trembling village head to his feet because he could barely stand from fear. Once they were alone, Stefan released a long breath and admitted that the entire display had given him chills. He confessed that he had not expected Vlad to have such a dark side. Vlad replied that everything had gone smoothly thanks to Stefan and admitted that he had actually been considering cutting someone down as an example. Stefan was completely stunned and told him that whenever he said things like that, it did not sound like a joke at all. The 2 men then sat down together and shared a beer. Vlad changed the subject and asked how Stefan had ended up so far out in the countryside, noting that a man with his abilities should not have been pushed into such a remote place. Stefan admitted that, in a way, it was partly thanks to Vlad because their pockets had become much heavier because of him. He explained that things had not seemed too bad at first. It had been a long time since they had left the city, and the fresh air had been enjoyable. However, he admitted that no job could compare to the one they had in Tanobo. He continued by saying that they felt they would eventually become nothing more than ordinary bandits if they kept accepting small jobs. Because of that, they searched for something bigger and eventually ended up there. Vlad asked what kind of request they had received. Stefan acknowledged that revealing contract details was normally against the rules, but admitted that it was hardly a secret because everyone familiar with the situation already knew what was happening. He then revealed a shocking piece of information, saying that a war would likely break out there very soon. Vlad was visibly surprised when he heard the word war. Stefan clarified that it would be a territorial war, the kind of conflict that nobles often enjoyed fighting. He explained that Baron Rosmitz had hired them to protect the village from bandits who had been raiding the area. Vlad questioned whether the Baron had really hired an entire mercenary group just to deal with ordinary bandits. Stefan pointed out that this was the heart of the problem. He explained that the so-called bandits were definitely not ordinary criminals. The clean and disciplined way they carried out their hit-and-run attacks resembled the tactics of highly trained soldiers. He shared his belief that these attacks were merely the beginning, a method of securing an entry route into Marcia before an official declaration of war. Vlad asked what Baron Rosmitz was doing in response. Stefan revealed that the Baron was deliberately sacrificing a few villages in order to buy himself more time. During this time, he would gather supplies and rally troops to build a strong defensive line. Stefan remarked that this was what a territorial war ultimately came down to, where human lives were spent strategically whenever necessary. Vlad quietly reflected on those words. Stefan further explained that they would only remain there until the end of the week before abandoning the position because they had no intention of staying aboard a sinking ship. Vlad then asked who Baron Rosmitz's opponent was. Stefan replied that it was most likely House Philos, since the pillaging forces had been steadily advancing from their direction. Vlad repeated the name Baron Philos as though it stirred a familiar memory. Stefan noticed his reaction and asked whether it was a family he knew. Vlad thought deeply about the name, convinced that it existed somewhere within his memories. He repeated the name Philos to himself several times until a memory suddenly surfaced. He remembered Jaeger fighting fiercely against someone. Back then, he had learned a great deal simply by watching. Then another darker memory emerged. He saw a house consumed by roaring flames, with several dead men and women lying on the ground. Standing beside the massacre was a terrifying knight holding a blood-soaked sword, a man known as the Mudboar of Central. The memory shifted to another scene of devastation. A village was buried beneath smoke and ash, and among the charred ruins sat a thick-mustached man on top of the bodies he had slaughtered, casually eating a meal. One of his subordinates approached and reported that they had finished their work there. Colin did not even look up as he asked whether there had been anything valuable to take from the place or if it had been nothing but worthless trash. The subordinate apologized and explained that the village had been extremely poor. However, he added that the next village should be different. It was located near Marcia, and its chief was supposedly a former tax collector. A slow grin spread across Colin's face. He remarked that a former tax collector must have hidden a considerable amount of money somewhere. Gripping the hilt of his sword, he asked for the village's name. The subordinate answered that it was Wisteria Village. Colin stood up and repeated the name with obvious satisfaction. He commented that it finally sounded like a place filled with gold coins. With that, they set their course toward Goth's village, where Vlad was waiting. The following day, the scene shifted to the very village they were marching toward. The atmosphere there was completely different. A wedding celebration was taking place. Goth's sister was getting married, and the entire village had gathered to celebrate. Young and old filled the square with laughter and dancing, completely unaware of the danger approaching them. A whole roasted pig turned slowly on a spit, and its aroma was enough to make anyone hungry. Goth approached Vlad and thanked him for the pig. Vlad replied in his usual practical manner, explaining that the village chief had given it to him and that he had simply deducted 1 gold coin from his payment in exchange. Goth laughed and said that Mari would love it. He added that, in the end, it was something that had received a knight's blessing. Vlad quickly dismissed that idea, pointing out that calling it a blessing was an exaggeration since he was not a priest. He then changed the subject and asked whether the groom had relatives in Marcia. Goth confirmed that he did. According to what he had heard, they operated a respectable textile shop there. Vlad bluntly reminded him not to forget their previous discussion. As soon as the wedding was over, he needed to send them to Marcia because there was very little time left. Noticing that the priest had arrived, Vlad told Goth to go, saying that the ceremony was about to begin. Goth looked up in surprise and replied that he would return shortly before hurrying to his sister's side. As soon as Goth left, Stefan approached. Vlad immediately asked for his report. Stefan confirmed that they had followed Vlad's orders and spread their scouts across a wide area. The information coming back was clear. Armed and unidentified individuals were advancing toward the village. Vlad asked how long they had before the enemy arrived. Stefan estimated that they would probably reach the village by nightfall, meaning preparations had to begin immediately. Vlad looked across the square at Goth's sister, who stood before the priest looking radiant and happy, and quietly stated that they had to protect that moment. He ordered Stefan to notify the village chief the moment the ceremony ended. Stefan accepted the order without hesitation. Vlad then asked about the enemy scouts. Stefan reported that their own men had already located them. Vlad gave a short nod and said that he would return shortly before walking away. The scene then shifted to a cave hidden among the hills. Inside, Colin's scouts had made camp around a small fire, and their mood was miserable. One scout complained that he was so tired of dried meat that he could barely swallow it anymore and wondered how much longer they would have to endure it. Another tried to encourage him by saying that Lord Colin should arrive soon, so they only needed to hold out a little longer. Rumors suggested that once they dealt with this village, a declaration of war would follow. The Baron had promised generous rewards, so all they had to do was stay patient. His eyes brightened as he pointed out that this particular village looked perfect for earning extra money. The farmland was well organized, and despite everything happening around them, the villagers seemed prosperous enough to hold a large feast. The first scout immediately became interested and asked about the feast. The other nodded and explained that it had apparently been going on since morning and even included a whole roasted pig. The word pig lingered in the air before another voice completed the thought. The newcomer remarked that, unfortunately, the scouts would not be eating any of it. The 3 men froze. Standing at the cave entrance with his sword drawn and a cold, dangerous expression was Vlad. The scouts turned pale with fear. Evening eventually arrived. Colin and his men approached the village, only to stop suddenly. 3 of their own soldiers hung from crosses beside the road. Colin stared at them and asked whether they were truly his men. His subordinate confirmed it without hesitation. Colin silently considered the situation. He had sent warriors who should have been far stronger than any ordinary village guard, yet not a single one had escaped. He concluded that the village must have hidden mercenaries or fighters of a similar level. His subordinate then asked what they should do. Colin looked at him as though the question itself was ridiculous. He stated that when someone sent a warning like this, it had to be answered in the same manner. They soon stood directly before the village gates. On the other side of those gates waited Vlad. Colin drew a deep breath and shouted loudly enough to shake the night air. He demanded to know who had dared to hang his subordinate. He ordered the culprit to show themselves and threatened that if the gates were not opened immediately, he would cut off every head in the village. A moment of silence followed before the gates slowly creaked open. Vlad stepped out alone. In a calm and measured tone, he remarked that it had been quite a long time since they had last met, although the circumstances were hardly pleasant. Lord Colin. Colin stared at him without recognition and asked who he was. Vlad allowed a look of theatrical disappointment to cross his face before replying with a relaxed smile that the previous encounter clearly had not been as memorable for Colin as it had been for others. Colin struggled to remember until realization finally struck. That unervingly calm expression and easy smile suddenly felt familiar. He searched his memory and finally found the answer. The name hit him like lightning. Instantly, images of Jaeger flooded his mind, and overwhelming rage consumed him. The veins on his face bulged as fury surged through his body. Vlad drew his sword and clearly introduced himself. He stated that his name was Vlad the Sora and that he had once served as Lord Jaeger's squire. Colin trembled with anger and muttered that, now that he looked closely, Vlad truly resembled Jaeger. The posture, the way he held his sword, and even that infuriating relaxed smirk were identical. Colin released his power, his eyes blazing with fury, and launched himself forward with all his strength. He screamed that Vlad was Bayezid's dog and declared that he would kill the northern wretch. He charged forward and unleashed a devastating strike. The attack landed with explosive force, sending dust and debris flying in every direction. When the cloud finally cleared, Vlad was still standing. He had caught the blow. Every ounce of Colin's rage had been stopped by Vlad's guard. Vlad calmly replied that his name was not Northern Wretch. Releasing his own power while maintaining the same easy smile, he reminded Colin once again that his name was Vlad the Sora. Colin snarled and attacked again, swinging upward from the left side. Vlad simply sidestepped the strike. Colin followed with another attack, then another from the right, and then an overhead blow, but Vlad met each one effortlessly, parrying every strike without wasting a single movement. Colin's men watched the duel uneasily. One of them asked what they were supposed to do, but another immediately ordered everyone to attack and follow Lord Colin's lead. Every soldier raised his shield, drew his sword, and advanced. Suddenly, an arrow pierced straight through one man's face. From the towers along the village walls, mercenary archers began firing at Colin's forces. One of Colin's lieutenants shouted that no arrows were to be spared and that the enemy must not be allowed near the palisade. He ordered the shield formation to advance. Arrows rained down, but the shields held firm. The lieutenant sneered and questioned whether a few arrows could truly make a difference. The soldiers continued pushing forward with their shields locked overhead. Then the ground beneath them changed. One soldier felt something slippery under his boots before understanding what it was. The lieutenant realized the truth a moment too late and screamed for everyone to retreat. A flaming arrow suddenly cut through the darkness and struck the ground ahead. The one who had fired it was Stefan. From the walls, he casually remarked that it was always wise to watch where one stepped. The oil spread across the ground, instantly ignited. Within seconds, flames raced across the battlefield and engulfed Colin's soldiers. Men began screaming in terror. Colin spun around in horror as he watched his formation collapse into complete chaos. He cursed under his breath and wondered what in the world was happening. Yet he could not afford to look away. Behind him, Vlad finally spoke. He calmly remarked that at last they had a battlefield reserved solely for the two of them.